In that case, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 13th episode of the HKN Connection. I'm Joseph Greene, and joining me here today is Katelyn Brinker and Sandro Sartoni. This episode's going to be a little bit different, but we're not doing the typical host-guest format, but each of us hope to address the complex idea that is transitioning from virtual. With many of our chapters now returning to an in-person situation, we're finding unique struggles that are lasting from the pandemic and arising in this new format as we readapt to being back in person and deal with some new issues like missing effectively 2 classes on campus to advertise to. So over the course of the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're each going to bring up an aspect about transitioning that we each want to guide through this conversation and hopefully aid you in your chapter's transition back on campus. The first aspect we're going to talk about is chapter resources. Next, after that, we're going to talk about what makes a practice successful and how to design successful practices for in-person. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit more arbitrarily about those unique challenges from transitioning from virtual. To get started, I'll take over the conversation and ask a couple of guiding questions about those chapter resources. So to begin with, HKN has a number of interesting resources that can definitely aid individuals and chapters in generating ideas, gaining new avenues for advertising, branding identity, and getting in contact with older members like alumni. So the first question I want to open up to Katie and Sandro, who are past chapter leaders themselves, is what resources have you found pertinent in developing events, and what have you found useful on an individual and chapter level through HKN?
So I guess I can kick this one off. I think one thing that's been really valuable for my chapter this year has been the Successful Practices database. Just being able to see what other chapters are doing and kind of get some new ideas. You know, it's nice to have that source of inspiration there to pull from. You know, sometimes too, kind of being in this transition period, we need some fresh new ideas because what we were doing before doesn't all work now.
I like it. Yeah, I definitely agree. We've used the chapter successful practices a couple of times now, which has been a very useful resource in itself. I think one aspect that I found pretty interesting is we have events ranging all the way back to 2018 on the successful practices database. So it has this very interesting progression looking through it where we have events pre-pandemic, events during the pandemic, and events post-pandemic. And I think that's been interesting in terms of helping my chapter come up with relevant events during that time period, but also seeing the transition of those events as well. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit further, but I guess out of curiosity, what was an example of an event that you've read recently that you found beneficial on the Successful Practices database?
Yeah, so I mean, one that my chapter has been looking at is, I believe it was the Kappa Psi chapter at UCSD did a social where they did an electronics tear apart. And they just got a bunch of old electronics, things that were going to like surplus or going to be thrown in the trash. And they just took them apart and used that as kind of a social event and something to talk about, something to share about. And so that's something that we've been kind of looking at as something that could be fun and interesting. But also I think the alumni events have been something that have really piqued our interest too. And, you know, trying to see how can we maybe combine that with a virtual element, because you know, with any university, really, our alumni are scattered all across the country, all across the world. So, you know, are there ways we can connect with them using like Zoom, like we're doing now, or, you know, other ways too to still involve them in the chapter, but not need them to travel if they don't want to. So those are a couple that, you know, have stood out, but I think too, some of the valuable categories are like fundraising and service. Those are two, you know, areas where, you know, chapters, we all need money to do what we want to do. And, you know, one of the core values of HKN is service and giving back. So being able to look in those areas of what other chapters are doing, I think is pretty valuable in my opinion. I don't know, Sandro, if you've gotten any big ideas from the Successful Practices database or anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the points you made here. And I think it's a really valuable resource, not only for many different reasons, actually. So, for instance, I could go back in time and see what my chapter did. And that could help me, trying to come up with ideas that might apply to my campus simply because it comes from my chapter in the past. Or maybe, say, for instance, that I don't have any ongoing or upcoming event targeted for alumni, because in my chapter, we never had the chance or time to discuss that. Why do I have to reinvent the wheel every time when there's already something that has proven to be successful, because it's in the successful practices database? I can take that, eventually, customize, tweak few things here and there, because maybe not everything will apply exactly as is, but still, it's an inspiration. And also, I guess it's really valuable also for chapters that are maybe were installed recently, and they're looking for some new ideas, or even chapters that were active in the past, maybe got lost in the way. That might happen, and they try to reinitiate activities, and maybe they're looking for some ideas. That's, I guess, a really great opportunity to look for events.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's also some other resources related to alumni too, such as OU Analytics, which, chapter leaders, if you're a reported officer, you can use that to, pull your alumni list and get that contact information. And then a new resource that's in development now is the HKN Learns module, which will include a tutorial on how to pull your alumni list and things like that. There's also the IEEE rosters tool, which you can use to find contact information for other IEEE OUs. So if you want to connect with the leadership of your section or your region, you can find that contact information there. So I think those are some related helpful tools towards that end of engaging alumni.
Yeah, most definitely. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, Katie, because I think there's some great resources that can couple in with the successful practices database as well. Because, if you want to do an alumni event, hopes if you're able to identify those alumni resources. Or one event on the successful practices database that I always appreciated is the Alpha chapter has a really creative way of doing their HKN candidate initiation. And if you're looking for candidates, then that can couple into resources like on the departmental level to identify key people to apply to that event. I think one other avenue that can be a bit more tailored to your individual chapter too, when it comes to coming up with creative event ideas, is don't neglect your annual chapter activity report. I know it's something that me personally had a bit of a tendency to, submit it and forget about, but it's this great resource of all of the events you've done in the past. And I can't tell you the number of times that me personally has gone back through and looked at the historical record of events we've done. And I would just be like, oh, wait, we have a connection with this company. Oh, wait, we have a connection with this professor. Let's leverage that and come up with a new event based off of this old template.
Right, definitely. And relatedly too, like my chapter just requested old activity reports from HKN old annual reports. And Nancy was able to find a few in her files for us because we wanted to use them for our video for our HKN story video competition for Founders Day. So that was a way for us to gather a little bit more chapter history, some stuff that had kind of been lost along the way. We have one now from like 1993. We have some from like 2008, 2009 timeframe, and then, more in the present as well. So that kind of also can help show, your chapter's evolution, which can be pretty cool to look at.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Sandro.
Yeah, sorry, but I really wanted to emphasize a couple of points I think were interesting in your in the things you were saying, Joe. One thing is having these sort of resources online helps you in retrieving information even from your chapter that you might not be aware of, simply because you either have a really good way to pass on to the next generation all the information you have. You either have some documents, but maybe sometimes down through the lane, maybe someone forgets to update that. Maybe something is said but not written, and so it gets lost. If you have these kind of resources online, it's there and you can go through it anytime. So that's really one interesting thing. And then there's another thing that struck me when you were talking about how to advertise to maybe when we were talking about the Alpha chapter to new potential inductees. And advertising is something that is crucial when you want to, bring your image out in your campus. And we have worked on something in that direction that is available as well as another resource. It's the branding guidelines. It's a comprehensive and exhaustive set of resources that are free for anyone to use as is or customize depending on their needs. And I believe it's really helpful because it covers literally anything that comes to mind when you want to interact with someone, may them be professionals or professors, your peers in your university community, you want to advertise on social media, and so on and so forth. I don't think it takes too much to customize it, and it's really nice when I go through social media and I see chapters with their own logos and stuff. It makes them recognizable. I see a post and I think, hey, it comes from that chapter, like for instance, Mu Beta chapter. It's instantly recognizable and I really like it.
No, I really appreciate that. I think you bring up a couple of great points. And I think one aspect that that's worth stressing during the course of this talk is, since the pandemic situation was so long, a couple of our chapters in the situation that the current e-board actually hasn't served during a time when things were in person. I think one aspect that we've talked about behind the scenes a little bit is, wow, things in person are a little bit more complicated than doing things over virtual. All of a sudden, you need to get, a room through the department to order food for people and everything like that. And while I'm sure we'll talk about these a little bit later in the call, I think it's worth mentioning that reflecting on some of these resources like the Successful Practices database and chapter activity reports is a great way to also discover those departmental resources. Because I think the best thing we can do as chapters is have a friend in the department. I can't tell you the number of times we've had to order something last minute and that one ECE, electrical and computer engineering staff member who really likes our chapters, like, I got you, I'll order it right now. So all different aspects to keep in mind. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, no, I was just going to reiterate what you're saying. Those relationships can be so important, and I think that's a resource in and of itself, is just the relationships you have with your department and with, the staff in your department and with professors and with other student organizations and, companies or local businesses, those kind of things. Those are the people that are going to help you in a pinch, and building up those relationships, can be invaluable.
Oh, yeah. And that also cycles back into, advertising on campus. When you spread the name of HKN, it could be to, these effectively now like 2 years of students that might not have heard of the chapter by not being on campus, but also maybe new staff members or professors who are not acclimated to HKN as well. Really treating this as a great foundation to start building up your on-campus community again is a great asset. And aspects like the branding guidelines will only help with that. And in the reflection, I think what might be beneficial, seeing what avenues you can build back up, is seeing what new avenues you can build your chapter in as well. One aspect that we've discussed a while now in chapter leaders cause and other venues is the idea of inducting graduate students, for example. Many of our chapters don't, and we've actually created a new resource recently to help chapter officers who are interested in inducting grad students successfully do so. And Katie and Sandro, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, like you just said, some chapters aren't inducting graduate students, but there's some common reasons why that's not happening. One of them is just they didn't know that they could. Another one is possibly some, kind of departmental issues where, maybe somebody is creating some obstacles or some roadblocks for those chapter leaders that are preventing them from, getting the proper list to do the invitations. Another one is sometimes just, not thinking that it would be helpful to the chapter. Maybe it's all undergraduate led and they're kind of like, well, we do events for undergraduate students and that's going pretty well for us. Why do we need to do even more things? So just kind of dispelling all those myths and giving people strategies too for combating some of those obstacles. That's what this document is all about. We have an FAQ section. We have a section about why it's beneficial to induct graduate students to your chapter, and also a section too about, why it's beneficial to a graduate student to want to join as well. Because even if you invite them, you still have to kind of show them the value proposition there so that they want to join. So all that's kind of encompassed in this document. And we've also been working on more graduate student programs across HKN as well, such as Grad Lab, the research profiles in the newest issue of The Bridge, which just came out a couple of days ago. So we're really trying to build up that value too from the HKN HQ point of view for graduate students as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's worth reiterating at this point. We've mentioned a couple of HKN initiatives like Grad Lab, for example, and we strongly encourage chapters to view that as a resource as well. Like seeing what HKN is doing, like the SLC, the Student Leadership Conference we just had, that's a great advertising point on campus too. Join our chapter because our organization, not just our chapter, is doing these awesome things like X, Y, and Z. And I think one other aspect I want to stress is in that graduate student document, which you can find most of these resources too, by the way, on IEEE-HKN's website under chapter operations. We talk a lot about why you might want to induct grad students too, and the value they can bring into your chapter.
Right. And oh, sorry, go ahead, Sandro.
No, I sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to share my personal experience as a grad student, as a mentee and as a mentor through my years in the Mono chapter. And I got to think about this when Katie earlier was saying. Some chapters may think that having graduate students might not be valuable for them, or maybe it would be nice to have them, but it's not really that important. On the contrary, when I arrived and I joined the chapter, I was a graduate student. And I can say that I've learned so much, so much from my seniors. Other grad students who are going through what I was going through, and they, give me some suggestions, what to do, what not to do, what to choose, for instance, as my thesis topic, and many other things, which is really valuable. And this was in the past. Now that I have some experience in my university as well, I can see myself helping out undergrad students in basically the same things I was asking help previously. And I can see how this brings value to the whole chapter, not just grad students, or it is also helpful for undergrad students. So I guess that this helps the chapter being more attractive to anyone, really.
Yeah, definitely. The thing I was going to bring up too is that, like Joe was mentioning, we do have a lot of programs and initiatives and things like that. A lot of the content that we're creating is available on our YouTube channel. And that can be, a resource for you as well if you want to go back and look at, sessions from Pathways to Industry, or even rewatch our Grad Lab sessions too. Those are available on our YouTube channel, which this podcast is as well, so you might already be there. But that can be a resource as well. So I think what we're seeing is there are a lot of resources and there are a lot of things that you can leverage as a chapter. You just kind of have to take advantage of them and use them because they're there to help you. And if you think they could be better, I think another kind of point is, you can always talk to the Board of Governors, to HKN HQ, so we can make those resources more helpful to you as well. It isn't, we created these, they're static, we're never changing them ever again. It's, we created these to help people. And if they're not helping people, we need to make a change, and we want to know about that.
100%. And I think we've covered a good amount of resources here, talking about, if you want to generate new events now that you're back on campus, there's ways to do that. If you want to get a brand identity or reimagine your brand identity, you can do that. If you want to reach out to the past members, you can do that as well. And if you have any issues locating these resources, feel free to reach out to any of us at any time over email or Slack or some other venue, and we'd be more than happy to help walk you through those. I think the last thing I want to mention before switching over to Katie's topic topics, which is talking more about how to craft successful practices, especially now getting back in person, is if you're not on it already, the Slack channel is an amazing way to stay connected, as well as our social media channels. We have them across many popular platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Feel free to subscribe. If you need the Slack channel, again, reach out to us and we can send you an invite. This will keep you up to date with all sorts of news around HKN and get you interconnected with your peers, which I think is the strong point of our organization, being an interweave community across the globe now that's dedicated towards the same values, the scholarship, character, and attitude. So let's help each other on that path forward. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Katie to talk a little more about successful practices.
Thanks. Yeah, so we've mentioned the Successful Practices database. We've mentioned other resources to help chapters be successful, but really wanted to dive in a little bit more to what actually constitutes a successful activity. How do you create something that will make its way into the Successful Practices database? What are some of the things to be thinking about, some questions to ask yourself when you're maybe planning an event? And we did have a session at the Student Leadership Conference a few weeks ago kind of on this topic, where we did a really big deep dive into this area. So I wanted to kind of talk about, what were some of your takeaways from that session? Were there anything that stood out to you, or anything that you learned from, hearing our other chapter leaders talk about what they do to plan successful events?
No, I think that's a great question. And I really did learn a lot through the SOC itself, and definitely during that session, in terms of like how to conceptualize and craft a successful practice. Kind of as we teased at before, especially in person, there's many more aspects to, make sure you need to get your ducks in line before executing an event. But even before then, I think one aspect that really stood out to me is going in with a clear-cut goal and a clear-cut audience as well. So it's like, if you're holding an event for undergrads, what value are you adding to their experience at the university or experience within your chapter through this event? Similarly with grad students or alumni and professionals, and you can always intermix these groups as well. And the second one is having a clear message with your event as well. One strategy that I think is really useful is coming up with a 2-sentence pitch for your event, where the idea behind that is, if your event has escaped the narrow scope, escape the scope so that you can no longer describe it within 2 sentences, then it might have become too complicated or a little bit too lost in the conceptualization process. So I think going in with a concrete idea of, we want to accomplish X, Y, Z through this community and this means, is a very good exercise when starting out and planning an event. And once you go in with a concrete idea of what you're going to do, who it's for, and how you're going to execute it, it's really, really easy to follow through those steps. The rest of it is just dealing with the occasional bottleneck here and there, from like a pizza arriving late, or maybe the department accidentally assigning your room to someone else or whatever, but more situational things than aspects that might come from the planning process itself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of the step even before that, before you can kind of give your 2-sentence pitch, is coming up with an idea in the first place to pitch about, and identifying what those needs are and who do you need to serve. So what are those pain points? What are those challenges? What are those needs? And what can you create to address those? And I think we had a couple of really good points from people at our session at the SLC of kind of how they do that. One of them was just thinking about what you would have wanted as a younger student, what would have made your experience better or helped you. Asking other students who maybe aren't in HKN, kind of like, hey, how's your semester going? Is there anything that's bothering you? Is there anything that's harder than it needs to be? And just talking to people, gathering feedback, kind of doing that customer discovery step if you want to make it businessy. But really trying to figure out, what do people need, and then from there that can help you create an idea for an event that you can then make sure it's targeting that need, and that helps you kind of make sure that your scope isn't getting too big, or you're not putting a lot of effort into a direction that's not really going to go very far.
Absolutely. And when I think of what is a successful event? So many things come to mind. But I guess that the starting point would be, as you two were saying, divide the concept and the execution steps. If you mix them, it can get messy because there are so many things to do, but you're doing them without a clear idea in mind. You could also think that it might be useful sometimes to even take a step back and think, what does it even mean to build a successful event? Which might sound philosophical in some ways, like, oh, what is successful? But I think it helps putting things in perspective. Like, what is the end goal here? Why am I doing this event? Am I doing the event just for the sake of having an event, or do I have some sort of goal? Because, and this is something that sometimes might slip out of mind. I mean, for instance, we have seen that in my chapter, talking from experience, we usually try to have two events, one event in the winter semester and another one in the spring semester, which is good. But why? What is the goal? Are we trying to attract new people? Are we trying to get our name out in the campus, invite interesting speakers? So if we build some metrics, it is also easier once the event is over to go back and say, these were our goals. How did we perform? And that, I guess it's really interesting. But also, once you start working on actually organizing the event, so there's the logistic part, where am I gonna fit all these people? Do I have enough pizza for everyone? All the important questions. But the point is, how do I make sure people are aware of this opportunity? And so once again, we go back to advertisement. Advertising events in a timely manner, giving enough time for people to, read about the event, get the information out there, is as important as having an actual good event. Otherwise, you build something that is really, really, really good, and no one knows about it. And of course, no one wants to be in that situation. I've been once, and it's terrible. And it learned me, and it taught me a lot of things. I've learned a lot from there. So I guess that advertising is important, and that will be interesting to talk about that later. You have to follow different strategies, whether you are in person or virtual, because it doesn't work the same way. It does not.
Right, definitely. I think my rule of thumb when it comes to advertising and events is try to tell people as many different ways as possible, because everybody's going to look for something different. There are people who delete every department email that they get automatically or just filter them into a folder. There are people who don't check Discord. There are people who don't check social media. So if you want to reach a wide audience, you have to use different strategies to reach different people. Joe, did you have any other kind of takeaways or, things that you think are important to keep in mind when it comes to trying to plan and execute a successful activity?
Yeah, for sure. I think one aspect, one aspect I want to mention, and I do thank you, Kate. I did get a little ahead of myself, being excited about that whole two-sentence pitch thing. But one aspect I do prompt chapter leaders around the turn of the semesters is really developing a concrete semester plan. One question we get a lot in HKN is like, okay, what is a successful practice? What is, the path of excellence you might have heard thrown around here and there? And really at the end of the day, if you're performing actions that benefit your chapter in a way that you desire, then that is a successful practice. And that's going to be way more important than any other metric that we can place on it. If you go into a semester and you say, we want to, bring in X% more candidates, or we want to reach out and touch this new department that we're not getting people from, or we want to reach out and start inducting grad students or attracting grad students, and you're able to do that, that is a successful practice. And by forming your events with these key overarching ideas in mind, it really helps you formulate, okay, what can we do? And kind of as we talked about before, identifying a few pain points where you can aid your community is a great way of generating a list. So one thing that last year I used when I was president of my chapter was surveys. So I would send out a survey each semester and just be like, okay, what did you like most from last semester? What did you not like from last semester? Is there any events you wanted to see, or is there any issues you think that the chapter could help you address? And that really helped us tailor our idea for the next chapter with how we can best aid our chapter members. And as a result, we actually saw an increase in performance. It was actually one of the most well-attended semesters that we had as a chapter. So it is a really effective way of getting in touch with your member base and giving you some big goals to work towards.
Yeah, definitely. I think too, kind of going off of that, it's not always about the quantity of events. It's all about quality. And, my advisor always says this, but things of quality have no fear of time. Meaning, it's way better to, plan a few very well thought out events that you can execute well than trying to do 5 things every single week. Taking that extra time, putting in the effort, that's going to pay off way more than a bunch of, rush through events where things maybe go wrong and it kind of leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. And part of that too is figuring out, what is working for your chapter, what's not working. And that all kind of ties into this aspect of debriefing and reflecting and, using that information. Sometimes I think we get kind of attached to the things that we plan. We're like, oh, I really like hosting this workshop. I really enjoy it. But if people aren't showing up, people aren't liking it, if that needs being filled in other ways now, you might have to part ways for the time being because it's not really serving anyone anymore. And I think that's something that's, can be kind of tough but you have to separate the personal from, kind of what's actually going on.
Absolutely. And I wanted to quickly expand on your point, Katie, talking about having maybe fewer events, which does not mean to have one event only, but fewer events, but well thought rather than a lot of events that are rushed. That is, of course, not beneficial, but not only in the sense that you are doing something that is not of interest for your campus, but I guess we can also take this and look at the other way around and think of your members who are working on events that are not of interest, or maybe of interest, but for a niche of students. If the goal is having something that interests a lot of people, and students, our members, spend lots of effort, free time, volunteering, of course, organizing these events, it can be frustrating a little bit. So in the interest of everyone, really, I know the joy of concluding an event that went well, and not only the relief, but the sense of the group that has strengthened throughout the event and throughout the days that eventually led to the event. This is something that is strategical also when you are looking to create a community within your chapter.
Yeah, definitely. And I think throughout kind of our discussion here, something that's stood out to me, or a theme, can be that, as we've also kind of transitioned from virtual, or even the transition to virtual, what was a successful practice before, the best way to plan an activity, or what even, people need, what challenges they're facing, that's all been kind of shaken up. And, it's all still very fluid. So I think this is kind of a good time to pivot over to Sandro's topic of that transition, from virtual to this kind of nebulous thing that we're doing now.
Thanks, Katie. Absolutely. I mean, this point came out many times earlier in the conversation. We were used to do things in a certain way for lots and lots of time, and then out of nowhere, we had to switch, and now we have to switch again, or maybe not, or maybe who knows, and who knows how much time it will take. So, and I guess that this is something that came out as we were talking about events. It can get confusing, but this is a broader topic, I guess. It applies to events, but it also applies to your day-to-day life within your chapter. So I guess the question here would be, as we are transitioning from virtual to more in-person activities, what are some of the trends or even challenges that you've noticed, either in your chapter or maybe from other chapters, you know, because maybe you have had the chance to talk with other people?
Yeah, Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I think that's a really good question. And I think there's a lot of them. Some challenges are definitely more ubiquitous across our chapters, and some chapters are facing more personal or unique situations as well. I guess to talk about some of the overarching ones that I've either heard of from peers or noticed in chapter activity reports or during chapter leaders calls is, there's a degree of varying comfort level now within the audience and community you might be advertising to that makes it a bit dubious what modality would work best for an event. So some people might be a little bit hesitant gathering in person, particularly if it's a large event like a guest speaker or something like that. And other people might just be so sick of Zoom, they just want to delete it off of their laptop. So it's like, what do you do in that situation to appeal for both of them? And I think one successful way I've seen a lot of chapters mitigate this issue is by offering hybrid events. I think it's been outstanding through the virtual, we'll say, university we all had going on last year, showing just how much can actually successfully be done virtually. Like now bringing that guest speaker from across the country can be done with a Zoom link instead of needing to do any more complex planning, or holding a watch party for a movie is now achievable by hosting people in a room and also setting up a virtual environment for people to join as well. So I think finding creative ways to leverage both of these platforms and over the course of time, seeing which works better for what events is going to be a great resource that will aid our chapters, even if right now it's a bit of a thorn in our side. I think another issue that I see chapters run into, and we've mentioned it briefly before, is, we've had a couple classes come in as well as leave without much engagement from the chapter. Especially in those transitions to and from virtual. So name brand recognition on campus might be pretty low, and finding creative ways to actually go through and introduce those now freshmen through sophomores or maybe even juniors that might not be super aware of clubs on campus to bring them into your community is going to be a bit harder. I know a couple of chapters work with professors who are familiar with the chapter to come and like advertise during survey courses. So if there's an intro to electronics course or intro to coding course or anything like that, that's a great way of reaching a wide audience for a very small time investment to breed that name brand recognition across your community. And then speaking to, I guess, a personal issue, I know one aspect that my chapter has been dealing with is we usually receive a small amount of funding from our department, and we use that as an excuse not to have local induction fees. We choose that because we're a new chapter and we don't want price to be a bar to entry. And over the last 2 years, we actually haven't gotten our funding restored. So kind of figuring out how to be most effective and frugal during events has been a very real skill that we've had to figure out. And I know other chapters that have had common source of fundings, whether it's departments or bake sales or textbook selling or something like that, suddenly have lost this. And figuring out what to do with reduced funds is a big struggle.
Yeah, definitely. I think from kind of like the people point of view too, something that a lot of chapters are struggling with is just, people in general are kind of burnt out and worn down, and it's been a really taxing, couple years, and not very many people or not everyone has the bandwidth to attend more events or serve in a leadership position and kind of go above and beyond what they're required to do right now. And so that's kind of an interesting challenge for chapters too, because it's, we want to plan good events, we want to help people, we want to do things that, fulfill some of those needs that students have. But, if everybody's too tired to go to the event, it's not because it was a bad event. It's a bigger, more systemic issue that none of us really have the tools to fix. And just kind of navigating, that kind of thing too. Or even, somebody mentioned at the student leadership conference, you know, going to campus now feels like a task. Commuting to campus to go to an event is something we're not all used to anymore. And just like scheduling that extra time into your day is, something that we've kind of had the luxury of not having to do for a bit. And so that's also kind of baked into that challenge as well. It's like, oh, this thing sounds really cool, but I'd have to, catch another bus and go back to campus and like do all these things. And maybe I'll just stay home and go to bed early. So.
Absolutely. I really felt those words because personally, at least, when the pandemic started, we found ourselves with more time, I guess, to maybe tackle on new things. Now that I'm back in person, maybe not 100%, but mostly in person, where did that time go? And and trying to fit everything is not easy. So that is something that really we should take into account. It's not something negligible. So I guess it's really, really, really true. Joe, sorry, you were trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to build off of Katie's point, and I wish I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but speaking of successful practices, I think during this transition period, and I just want to remind chapters, this is going to be, a year-long or multi-year transition back into in-person. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint getting back to the status quo. But keep in the back of your mind during this transition period, the most important thing, and if you will, the most successful practice is protecting your mental health. So if this is not the semester to hold technical events, if this is not the semester to bring in guest lecturers, if this is not the semester to ramp up your activity on campus, don't. That's okay. Make sure you're comfortable on campus first and your chapter members are comfortable on campus first. If you serve yourself a little bit by taking that meeting off or taking that one less event a month or something like that, just to have the bandwidth for this transitional period, that is most important. And I really want to make sure that any HKN member or chapter leader listening to this gets that message. This is something I hope we're going to be stressing over these next couple of months. Take the time for yourself. That is most important. HKN just celebrated its 117th year. It's going to be here for a lot longer as well. So if you don't check off every box this semester, that's perfectly okay. We purposefully reduced our activity this semester. Like we skipped one of the engineering block parties simply because the new incoming e-board didn't have the bandwidth with learning being back on campus, and that's okay. We're doing just fine. And I think I'll just stress that again. Take a little time for yourself. You're doing just fine. It will all work out.
Right. I think we can be our own toughest critics, but giving ourselves a little bit of grace and, again, it's okay to cancel that one event that, nobody's really feeling anymore. It's not the end of the world. What's most important is, supporting yourself, supporting your fellow officer members, your fellow chapter members, and just, getting through. That's kind of the key here. Is it's most important to just do the best you can and make it through.
Absolutely. We are facing a challenge, but we are not facing a challenge alone. And I'm saying this also bearing in mind the position of the Board of Governors of IEEE-HKN. We are here to help. We are working towards, building, continuously building material and resources for you. This episode being one of those, of course. But the point is, if you feel like, because it can be hard at some points, like you have the responsibility for your chapter. You're not alone, of course, but the point is you have the responsibility for your chapter. Maybe you're facing some difficulties who am I going to talk about this with? And so if you find yourself, also reiterating on what Joe was saying before, find yourself needing someone to talk to, we're here. And we're students. So we are in your position. And once again, the point of the Board of Governors is to serve members from the society, from the association. So really, talk to us if you need to. That being said, I would like to end the conversation on a positive note and say, what is something that maybe even came out during one of our monthly calls that you find successful, going back to the original point, during these times of transition?
I would say, I think one thing that's kind of come out of this that's been positive is that, people are more comfortable and accepting of doing things online now. So I think we've already brought this up, but, being able to have speakers from, the other side of the country, the other side of the world, being able to do those things and have them call in and create new opportunities that we wouldn't before. Like, I'm located in Central Iowa. It's not a tourist destination. Nobody wants to really travel here unless they have a good reason to, if I'm being frank. So being able to have a company talk to us on Zoom, or alumni talk to us on Zoom, or, an expert in a specific technical field, talk to us online. I think that's been really valuable and interesting. And being able to also create hybrid opportunities as well. And that's created some interesting collaborations along the way. So, I know it can be kind of, there's the Zoom fatigue kind of thing, and, more and more online things is not always fun, but it also creates some very amazing opportunities that we wouldn't have had before, and chance to network with new people and things like that too. So, there is a silver lining there, I think.
No, I really appreciate the point you bring up. And I think one aspect that I want to build off of your point is through this online environment, and particularly the last year worth of challenges, it really instilled, in my opinion, a sense of collaboration into our organization that we weren't seeing before. Because now the possibility of working with another chapter or another student organization, in a different state, in a different country, across the world from you is now feasible. And I think that's a really cool situation, that it's like, over the pandemic, our chapter was able to hold many more, like vastly more collaborative activities successfully than we have in the past. I know I worked with Sandro at one point to be able to hold an event for out of US chapters. And it's like, when would we have been able to successfully organize that pre-pandemic? And I really hope that after this situation, having this more interconnectivity really starts breaking down some of these physical walls within our organization, or even, cultural walls within your university, like different organizations within your university working together successfully would be a very great ramification from this past year worth of event, and something that I hope to see a little bit more in our organization.
Right. And relatedly too, because of this and being kind of forced to hold virtual events, we've been able to do things like have the IEEE-HKN experience, or this past student leadership conference, where a lot more people could attend because they didn't have to travel. And, getting to kind of engage some more members in that way, I think that's also really strengthened the IEEE-HKN community, because people could see, the bigger picture and see what IEEE-HKN is outside just their university.
I guess that now that we are finally transitioning back to in-person activities, we do not have to forget the lessons we learned from these virtual past 2 years or something like that. Because going back to in-person doesn't mean erasing everything we did in the past 2 years, but integrating them, doing kind of a synthesis, and see how we can embed the tools we learned to use with what we would usually do in person, and take the best out of these two worlds that might seem the opposite, but they can cooperate, I guess. So we have talked about a lot of different things today, and I really enjoyed the conversation, but I think it's time for a wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Sandro. So I just want to mention too that we'll try to link a lot of the things that we brought up today in the description of this episode so that they're easily accessible. But I also wanted to highlight some things that we do have coming up or things that have recently happened that I think you should be aware of. So one of them is the newest issue of The Bridge is out. It just came out a couple of days ago, and it's all about trends in communication networks. It's a really great issue. Qualcomm provided the cover as well as some articles in it. There's our new graduate student research spotlight segment in this issue as well, which is really cool to see. So it's a great issue. I encourage you to check it out. We'll try to link it in the description below. Another thing to be on the lookout for is another podcast from HKN, and that's our young alumni podcast called Career Conversations. And so this is going to be launching in November. We'll have episodes on a wide variety of topics that kind of affect the young professional. So things like imposter syndrome, career planning, mentorship, and a lot more topics as well. So just be on the lookout for that coming soon. November is right around the corner. We also have another episode of Grad Lab coming up in November. So be on the lookout for advertisements for that as well. I believe this one's all going to be about your individual development plan and how you can create one around, your graduate student experience, your research, and work with your advisor so you can, achieve what you want to achieve out of your graduate program. So it should be another really great episode as well. The past two are on our YouTube channel. Also stay tuned for our November episode of the HKN Connection. We're working with IEEE Women in Engineering, or WE, to set up an episode there. So that should be really awesome. And then Founders Day was just yesterday. So happy 117 years, everybody. And we also still have our video competition open. So submissions there are due November 8th. We gave it an extra week so you can include what you did for this past Founders Day in your videos as well. This is just simply a 1 to 3 minute video that your chapter can submit for the chance to win great prizes. So be sure to, create a video with your chapter and submit it. It's an awesome way to kind of showcase what makes your chapter special and unique and share our HKN story together. Lastly, there is another grad student newsletter set to come out on November 12th. So if you're a grad student or have inducted graduate students, you can reach out to them. And we'll have, we can add them to our mailing list for that so they can be aware of graduate student related opportunities in HKN. And so with that, I want to thank all of our listeners again for watching and listening today. We really appreciate you taking the time. We hope some of what we discussed resonates with you. And like we said, always feel free to reach out to us and the rest of the Board of Governors and HKN staff. We're here to help you. And with that, I think we can call this an episode. So thank you again, Joe and Sandro, for doing this with me today. And thank you all for listening.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.